Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm so disappointed I'm not there. I was so looking forward to being there in person and being back in Budapest and meeting everybody. I really appreciate the organizers allowing me to do this when I had a last-minute emergency and couldn't travel. So I'm going to talk to you today about failure. And why talk about failure? We talk about failure because failure is critical to innovation. I'm in software. I think a lot of you are also in software technology, but in any industry, we are constantly trying to innovate, to invent, to make hard things easy, to solve problems for people in novel ways. And in order to do that, to do anything interesting new, we make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we create new things, is we don't create them until we do. Now, you can believe me with that, or you can believe somebody much smarter than me, that Albert Einstein said, anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. So I think he's much smarter than me. I think you can trust him. But I also like this way of saying it. This is from a filmmaker, Kevin Smith, no relation. What he says is failure is success training. And I really like that idea because that talks about failure as preparing for success, failure as being critical for success. So if failure is required for innovation, and we are all trying to innovate and to invent and to create new things, it's less about avoiding failure and it's more about what we do when that inevitable failure happens. How we handle when we fail is actually the most important thing. And I think about this in terms of creating a fail-safe environment. Now, I've been in the industry, as you heard, for a long time, for over 25 years. And in the earlier days of when I was working, we talked about creating a fail-safe environment, but the way we discussed it was avoiding failure avoidance. We talked about proving our code. We talked about catching every corner case so that we would have no defects in production. And of course, we don't talk about that anymore because it was untenable. It was never achievable. But we tried for a long time, but we were never able to achieve it. So today, when we talk about creating a fail-safe environment, what we mean is creating an environment where we recover from failure safely. We fail smart. Now, as you heard, before I was at Avvo, I was at Spotify. And Spotify is a company, if you went to Joachim's thing the other day, you heard probably more about this. Spotify is a company that has gotten extremely good, or certainly was when I was there, at failing smart. And at Spotify, when I was there, we talked about it in these terms: minimizing the blast radius. And in fact, this is a quote from Mikael Kranz, who is the chief architect at Spotify. This was just something he and I were in a conversation on Slack, and he said this, and I asked him if I could quote him on it because I liked it so much. We want to be an internal combustion engine, not a fuel-air bomb. Many small controlled explosions kind of propelling us in a generally okay direction, not a huge blast leveling half the city. And I like this idea as well, this idea of small controlled explosions pushing us forward, pushing us in a good direction. So how do you minimize that blast radius? How do you use those explosions to propel you forward? Well, one way to do it is to fail fast, is to find the fastest and cheapest path to learning. And today we can do that, but it used to be a lot harder. And I'm going to tell you a little story. I don't know, I can't see you because it's dark there, but But if I asked you to raise your hand, how many people recognize Clippy or know Microsoft Office Assistant, I would bet, if not all of you, most of you, or certainly more than half of you would. Which would be fascinating because at least a section of you are too young to have ever seen it in a product. Clippy was part of Microsoft Office Assistant. It was a feature that was added in, I think, Office 97, and then shipped to about 2004. And it was, the reason you all know it is because it was a failure of historic proportions. It was a failure so big that it escaped products, it escaped software industry, it became part of popular culture. Clippy is synonymous with horrible user experience, long past when anyone has ever seen it in an actual product. And I worked at Microsoft when Clippy was being developed, and I did not work on it, but I had good friends who did. And I can tell you, at this time, when this horrible failure was being developed, the people who worked on it were extremely bright and very talented. I was at Microsoft Research at the time. There were folks from research working on it, people with PhDs from top-tier universities with years of industry experience. At this time, Office was, and actually probably still is, the most successful software product of all time. This was Office at its peak. So it was a hard team at Microsoft to join. It was a team of very, very smart people with tons of experience on building great products. All these people, all this talent, all these resources came together and spent literal years, not just person years, literal years to build something that just completely missed the mark. So why? Why did that happen? Well, a lot of it has to do with the way we wrote software back then. It was a different world. We didn't deliver software by download because we all had 56K modems at best. So instead, we did it as you would any product prior. We built things in a very industrial way. So for a product the scale of Office, Microsoft would literally lease the entire, or as much as it could, manufacturing capability for disks and diskettes. Diskettes were still a thing for the entire world. It would take over every plant it could, and it would lock them down. So during that time when Office was being produced, no DVDs were being made, no CD music was being made. It was just Office. And in order to do that, and to do that for a worldwide release, Microsoft would have to book that capability years in advance. So if you were a developer on Office, you knew to the day, 2 years in advance, the day you were going to release. Now, of course, if there was a serious problem, you could delay that release, but that would mean millions and millions of dollars per day because Microsoft had essentially shut out everyone else from producing these disks. So you're a developer, you have a spec because, of course, you have to have a specification. Otherwise, how do you know what you're going to write? So you write, you have a specification, you have your date, and you just start working and typing. And as you approach that date, you get to that golden master date. And that golden master back then was literally the master disk or the master disks that would be used to produce all these copies. You hit that date, you're done, went off to the plants. They produced these plastic and foil discs. Those discs got put into cases. Those cases got put into boxes. Those boxes got put into bigger boxes. Those bigger boxes got put onto pallets. Those pallets got put onto trucks. Those trucks got put onto drove. Take those pallets of boxes off, put them on boats or put them on trains where other trucks would take them or other trains, or they'd go to warehouses and they'd sit, and then trucks would take them from warehouses to stores where they'd be put on shelves. You would take your car, you'd walk, or you'd take a bus to the store. You would walk to the shelf, you would take the box full of cases of plastic and foil discs to the counter, you would pay for it, you would take it home, and you would spend an afternoon or an entire day installing the software. Today, you can ship your website with every save in your editor. You can ship your mobile app on iOS maybe a couple times a week now, on Android every day. There is literally no reason to wait years, because actually Office Assistant took more than one Office release. It took years from idea to the point where it reached the customer. And that time, that was not a small controlled explosion. That was a fuel air bomb. Because if Microsoft had been a smaller company at that time, it was the largest software company in the world, certainly one of the biggest companies in the world. If it had been a smaller company, that would have been the end of the company. A failure like Office Assistant could have just killed a smaller company. But luckily, Microsoft was big, so it got to keep going. But while there was effort during Office to try this in front of somebody to represent the customer, we didn't have a good way to bring our features to customers quickly and get feedback. Now it's much easier. And I'll tell you another story. This is a quote from T.J. Watson. He was a president of IBM. And as you can tell from the photo, this was a long time ago. He's not been a president of IBM recently. But he has this quote: "If you want to increase your success rate, double your failure rate." And I worked at IBM. And I worked at IBM before I worked at Microsoft, which gives you an idea of how long ago that was. And when I worked at IBM, I worked in IBM research, and I worked on a project. I worked on this project for a year at this research lab. And as we approached the end of the project, we found out that 2 other labs at IBM were working on exactly the same project. And at the time, it seemed sort of the height of big company stupidity. The company wasn't even aware that different teams were working on the same project. And because we'd all found out about each other so late, we could share what we'd learned, but we couldn't have shared things earlier and maybe adjusted and learned from each other and worked together. So it seemed like a colossal waste of intelligence and resources. But in retrospect, and later, I realized, well, back then, it was very hard to fail quickly. So IBM, if it had taken years to make a failure and IBM wanted to double its failure rate, you'd maybe never get to a success. So what IBM did instead is, instead of failing serially, IBM decided to fail in parallel. And that's how they were going to get their small controlled explosions. And that's how they were going to fail faster. So how you handle failure and how it becomes part of your company, your team, so that you can innovate. It's critical that you don't treat failure as something to be punished, because it's critical for innovation. It's an opportunity to learn. And if you don't learn from your failures, that's something to actually punish, right? If you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, you're not learning anything from them. That's something that you should be looking to say, this is not okay. So if failure is required for invention and innovation, and you punish failure, you're through the transitive property, you are punishing innovation. And most companies would say that they want more innovation, not less. But if they punish you for making a mistake as you're trying to innovate, you're not going to try and innovate very hard. It's much easier to do what you already know how to do than to try and invent something new, especially if not succeeding in that invention results in punishment. Every failure, and it's no fun to actually try and learn from your failures. You make a mistake, you're embarrassed. You wish you'd have done it better. You know you could have done it better. And sometimes the last things we as humans want to do is to sit and focus on our mistakes and to think about all the things we did wrong. But if you can take the time and you can do that, you can learn a tremendous amount. Every failure can tell you about a lot of different things. it can tell you about your process. So I've had this conversation before, literally. You say, oh, wow, this release was really buggy. Our customers are unhappy. What happened? And it's talking to a dev manager, and they say, well, the test team was working on this other project, and so they shifted on late. And then we had test automation that actually caught the issue. But unfortunately, it's been really flaky, and so nobody looked at it, and just nobody's paying attention to it. I have had that conversation. That's a failure process. That's something that can be fixed. Failure can also be about your team. And when I say your team, I don't mean that your team is bad. The people on your team are bad. What I mean is your team had the wrong set of people on it for this project, for what you were working on. You had embedded MySQL in your project, which I have had and didn't know anything about, and no one on my team knew about, and we struggled with it. And it could have been solved by getting somebody who actually had worked with it before on the team to help us go faster with it. So it could be you don't have the right skill set, or it could be you don't have enough people, or you have too many people, or it could be personality things. There's lots of reasons, but you can learn about from your team. And your perception of your customers. We all create these myths in our heads about who our customers are. And that myth hopefully is informed by good things. Hopefully you have user research, and you're reading App Store reviews and tweets and getting user forums. You're getting all sorts of input, but you're assembling that through your own perception, and you're creating a myth of who your customer is. And maybe at the very beginning, you may actually know every one of your customers, and you may know them very, very well. You know their hearts, and you know their brains, and you have a perfect understanding of your customers. But hopefully your product grows. And as your product grows, you get new customers, probably ones you don't know personally, and you don't know them. So you just start making decisions about who they are. And sometimes that's right, and sometimes that's wrong. And even if today you have a perfect understanding of your customers, you're going to add features, you're going to get new customers tomorrow, and you won't have that perfect understanding anymore. You can also learn about your own misconceptions of your product. And you may say, well, I know my product, I'm making my product, I understand my product perfectly well. But the thing is that we build products, hopefully, to solve problems for our customers. So we are building a product that's going to solve a problem, let's call problem A, for our customers. And our customers are using it, and some of them are solving problem A with it, but others have figured out that our product also solves problem B. And it solves problem B really well. And they're very happy customers, but they're using they're using a different product than the product we're building. And we get to a point where we solve problem A in a new and better way, and all the customers who were using our product to solve problem B are now unhappy. That happens. And I'll tell you a story of how that happens, or how I've seen that. And of course, sometimes it's us. Sometimes we make mistakes, and we don't understand ourselves well. And so because of that, we fail, and we can use the lessons from that failure to be better at what we do. And ignoring that and trying to avoid that, as uncomfortable as it is, isn't going to make us better at our jobs. Taking the time to extract those lessons is critical. And if we only extract them when we have a failed product or failed project, that ends up being somewhat like punishment. We're kind of punishing people for failing. What I like is that you take that time and you look at every project. So you don't just do, as we used to call them postmortems, right? When a failed project happens, you go and postmortem, you're examining the dead body to understand why it died. Instead, think about it in terms of every project, a successful project or a failed project, has lessons that you can learn about how to do the next one better. And if you do these retrospectives on every project, wow, this project was really successful. What did we do well, and how do we do that again? And actually, even with the most successful projects, there's probably things we could have done better, and let's know that too, so that in the next project, we do this better. You do that for the successful projects, you do that for the less successful projects. This really didn't go the way we'd hoped. Let's understand why, so that we don't make those mistakes again. Let's make all new mistakes, right? Take those lessons, write them down, and share them. Share them with your company. Share them with other teams. If the team next door to you makes the same mistake your team made, it may make you feel a little bit better. Well, we weren't the only ones who've made this mistake. That makes you feel a bit better for a little while. It's not great for your company. It's not creating a better value for your customers. Instead, let them learn from your failures. Let them make all brand new mistakes that you can learn from as well. Share what you learn within your company. As they say, those who do not learn history are bound to repeat it. Failures hidden or forgotten are failures that will be repeated. Let's learn from our failures. Let's not try and hide them or forget about them because they make us feel bad. So coming back to Spotify, because Spotify, as I said, just did this really well. And I'm going to show a couple examples of what that looks like in a culture. We have these now from Avvo, but I still kind of like the Spotify ones. So I'm going to show a few of those. One, this is a fail wall. This was from a squad at Spotify. And what I liked about this, they're right up there on their whiteboard, and they're saying, these are the things that we did wrong, and this is what we learned from them. But what I especially liked about them was that this was on a whiteboard that faced a walkway. So it wasn't something that was sort of in the back of their team area that nobody but them could see. This was something they showed proudly to every person that walked by. They were not embarrassed about this. They thought, this is all the things that we're learning. Similarly, that collection of project retrospectives doesn't have to be anything special. You don't need any sort of special CMS or anything like that. It could be literally, and for Avvo it is, a collection of Google Docs in a folder, linked so that people can find it. It's just there so people can learn. This is a post from my old boss, former CTO at Spotify, Oscar. And this was not long after I joined the company. And to the whole company, he says, let's celebrate our failures. Let's celebrate how we can learn. And that inspired other teams to talk about their failures and to be very open about it. So if you look back at the Spotify engineering blog and now at the Avvo engineering blog, you'll see certainly posts about how great and how smart and how a team did a really great thing, but you'll also see posts about, here's a big mistake we made and this is what we learned from it. And for me, when I look at other companies, that's what I look for. I want to see, it's really easy to talk about how all the smart things you've done. It's really hard to talk about the things you did that weren't as successful and to be open and transparent about them. And a lot of those posts have much more to teach than the success ones. Bob Sutton, who is a management professor, he's a management consultant, he said this: the most creative people and companies don't have lower failure rates. They fail faster and cheaper and perhaps learn more from their setbacks than their competitors. That's important. Failing faster and cheaper and learning more from it. That actually is more than creating a good culture or being innovative. That can be a competitive differentiator for your company. Failing smarter, failing faster, and learning from those failures can actually help you put distance between you, your company, and your competition. How do we make failure safer? We talked about failing fast. This is what that might look like. About minimizing that cost of failure, trying to get these small controlled explosions and not the big fuel air bombs. This is a product development framework called Think It, Build It, Ship It, and Tweak It, another Spotify thing, but it's essentially a distillation of lean product development. And that's where it comes from. if you think of a horizontal axis here as time, it's time for feature development or new product development. And this vertical axis is investment. And that could be literal sort of euros invested, but it could also be just time or thinking about opportunity cost. It's collective sort of generalized investment. So if you go back to work on Monday and you go out to lunch with some of your coworkers and you have an idea for a new feature or a new product for your company, and you're talking about it on your way back and, oh, that seems really like a very good idea. You get back to work, you go talk to your product manager, and you say, on the way back from lunch, we had this really great idea. And the product manager says, that does sound like an okay idea. Let's spend a little bit of time and think about it. So now you're starting to invest here. You can see this curve starting to go up. But you're not investing a lot. You're just spending maybe part-time, maybe you, the product manager, maybe a designer, maybe another developer or other manager, just thinking about it, maybe doing a little bit of prototyping, seeing if this is a viable idea. And at a certain point, you get to the point where you say, this is a good idea. We should do this for real. Now the rest of the team gets involved, and that investment slope goes up pretty significantly because now everybody's working on it. You're trying to get it ready to go to customers. So you want to minimize that time. And how do you minimize the time in development? Well, you create not the full sort of perfect version of a feature. You create an MVP, the minimum viable version of that feature. You want to just prove that this is a good idea. So the whole team works on it. You're working on it. It's getting better. It's getting better. You decide it's ready to give to customers. So now you ship it. Now, in a lot of companies, shipping is a binary thing. And certainly in some industries, it is a very true thing that it's one or the other. This sort of binary state, not shipped, now shipped. But in software especially, and even in a lot of hardware, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You don't have to now give every customer this feature. Instead, you can roll it out. You can give progressively larger groups of customers access to the feature or the product to see how it does. Is it actually giving what you were hoping for? You were looking for it to do something. So you have metrics. You can understand, are users actually engaging with this feature? Do they like it? Do they come back to it? You can also see, is it actually working or is it crashing? And you can do that in progressively larger groups so that you can take something that could be a big fuel air bomb. It could be an office assistant. And instead, it's these smaller controlled explosions. So you're learning as you're going. And you may see during that process, we were looking for users to engage with this feature. It turns out they're not. So maybe the original idea wasn't as good as we thought, or maybe we did it in a slightly wrong way. We can decide maybe we pull the feature out, or maybe instead we iterate on it a little bit before we give it to more customers and learn. But eventually you found that right sort of product market fit with this idea on the MVP, and it's gone out to 100% of your customers. So now it's shipped. It's shipped to 100% of your customers. And what we're doing here is we're minimizing this area, this shaded area, because essentially this is investment without return. Until you have shipped to 100% of your customers, you're getting zero return on your investment. So you want to minimize that investment, because if this is not a success, if this is a failure, that's great. You've learned, you want to learn from it, but you certainly don't want to overinvest in that learning. You want to get that learning as cheaply and as quickly as possible. But say it's out to your customers, the customers like it, it's not the full version, it's the MVP, so now you enter in the tweak it. And in the tweak it, you're just iterating on the idea and improving it. Essentially, you do many versions of this until you get to that sort of logical, good enough, feel that this is a great version of this idea, we're going to move on. So as that tweak it is happening, you're kind of pulling investment out. You're just improving. Eventually you get to the good place and you've moved on. But one thing I want you to notice is that investment never goes to zero. Why? because a new library will come out and it breaks the feature. Or you have a new feature you want to add and it kind of really wants to live in that screen real estate that the old feature lived in, and you have to move it. Or you want to build something new, but it has interaction with this existing thing, so you have to modify it. That investment never goes to zero. So the idea is that you want to also make sure that unless something is adding and improving your product, you don't put it in the product. I have had product managers say to me, well, this is sort of metrics neutral, so it doesn't hurt. It doesn't help, but it doesn't hurt, and I think it aligns well with my product vision, so let's just leave it in. And the answer is, well, we're gonna have to deal with this forever. So unless it's actually pushing the product forward, it is gonna waste our time into the future. And of course, along the way, there's a ton of different techniques you can use to actually, at every stage here, to find that failure. If it is going to be a failure, catch it early, and then before you make a big mistake. Now I'm going to tell you one more story. And this is a story not of somebody else's failure, but this is a story about a failure I was very involved with and had a lot of responsibility on. I'm going to tell you about one of my failures. That is a feature I worked on at Spotify called Spotify Now. Probably most of you do not recognize this user interface. And Spotify is probably happy about that, but also Spotify marketing is probably not that excited about that. Back in the fall of 2014, I was working at Spotify. I was a tribe lead, and we had competitive intelligence that Apple was going to release a competitor to Spotify, which we now know as Apple Music. And Spotify, at that point, was sort of the emerging leader in streaming, but Apple was, and that probably actually still is, the worldwide leader in music sales, selling music. So the idea that they were now going to enter our space was pretty concerning. So Spotify decided that we, as a company, we were going to do something to prove that we were the true innovators in the streaming music space. We looked at a bunch of different features that were in different stages of Think It. We had some other things that we'd been thinking about and hadn't even made it to the early prototype stage, but that sort of unified a lot of these features together. And we decided we're going to take this set of features, we're going to create a narrative around them, and we're going to release these right before Apple Music launches. And we're going to show the world that Apple is chasing us, which was a great idea. The problem was that's not how Spotify worked. And in fact, every time Spotify had tried to do one of these, what we would call big bang, coming back to Fuel Air Bomb releases, it had been unsuccessful. But we had all the lessons, we had all the retros from those, and we said, no, we're going to do it right this time. So we're going to learn. So we said, okay, this is we really want this released, this big event. So we started working on it, and we're working on it. And normally we'd be releasing, as we're in development, we'd be finding MVPs of all these features and releasing them to our users and getting their feedback and understanding what was working, what wasn't. That wasn't what we were doing because we really wanted this very big press event. And we knew the press was watching us very closely. So any feature we released might get known, and it would kind of take away from this big press event. So we're developing, we're iterating, we're using it internally. We're trying to test it as best as we can. And something's happening. And what's happening is we're using it, those of us in the company, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel, it was supposed to be this really great, really innovative thing, but using it didn't feel that great to us as the users. And we knew from experience that employees of the company were not necessarily indicative of our customers. We were expert users at our own product. So, there was, okay, maybe this isn't for us, but most people will still like it. But that kind of nagging feeling kept happening. And so eventually we were able to convince the product and marketing team to let us try this out try some of these features out with a group of users. So we were really, they were really nervous about it. They didn't want them to leak, but they let us do it. We gave it to a cohort of users in New Zealand, a very small cohort, and we were lucky that none of them happened to be press. So that just worked out well. And we gave it to them, and we're using them. I should say, by the way, so this was, I wasn't a developer on this. I was the development sort of lead. I was the road manager for the development part of it. And this, to give you an idea of scale, was the biggest, it may still be, I don't know, the biggest project Spotify had ever done, with hundreds of developers. And this included things like video and podcasts and party and running and this UI that you see here, this idea of the right music for every moment of your day. So this was a massive project, biggest Spotify had ever done. And so there was a lot riding on this. There were a lot of people working on this. So we convinced them, let us test it in New Zealand. We did, and I go to the analysts and I say, okay, well, what are we seeing now? And they say, well, you're not going to believe this. This has got, we've increased retention by 6%. Now, for a product like Spotify, that is a subscription product, retention is the super core metric. Keeping users using the product week after week, month after month. And for a subscription service, that's absolutely critical. So, and at a scale of Spotify, increasing a core metric like retention by an entire digit was nearly impossible. It was incredibly difficult at the aggregate of the product to increase one of those core metrics significantly. So a 6% increase was phenomenal. It was legendary, and all doubt, all concern was erased. We had a winner, and we could not wait to get it to our customers now. So obviously, us using the product, we were not indicative, and customers loved it, and we need to get this to them as quickly as possible. So we're moving forward. We're ready. We feel like we're approaching readiness for release. So at that point, we scheduled the press event, because we learned that was one of the mistakes we made prior. We scheduled the event before we knew we were ready. This time we knew we were ready. The big day happened. The company leadership was in New York with movie stars and rock stars and whomever. My product peer and my design peer, sort of the road managers, we were in Stockholm with the developers and everybody a lot of the people who worked on it, and we were watching the event live, and we were drinking champagne, eating cake, and it was great. The company leadership made the announcement, and we flipped the switch, and we released the feature. But of course, we did it in the right way. We didn't release the feature to 100% of our users. We released it to 1% of our users in our 4 sort of critical markets. And then we waited, because we knew we had to do that. So every day I'm coming by the analysts and I'm saying, what are the results of the test? Like, what's happening? And, for days they were saying, well, it's okay, just come back another day. It's way too early. We don't have enough data. And then they started saying, well, it's still early. We don't have enough data, so it's not conclusive, but it's not quite what we were expecting. It's not what we were hoping for. Go, oh, okay. But but don't worry, come back. We don't have enough data yet. And then finally come and talk to them and they say, yeah, this didn't work out the way we thought it did. And instead of getting that 6%, that legendary increase in retention, that 6%, instead we had a 1% decrease. And now we had a very big problem. The problem was, not only was this attracting and keeping users on our platform, something we had done actually made them want to quit using our product. But we just made a big announcement to the world about how innovative and interesting and exciting this product was, and we couldn't give it to anyone because it would make them actually stop using our product. And we were in trouble because we'd failed big. We hadn't failed small. We hadn't followed our own ways of working. And because we'd done this sort of fuel air bomb, we didn't know what we'd done wrong. And that led to a very long spring, summer, and fall where we were just testing and testing with the same cohort of users. Actually, eventually we had to keep adding more people into this cohort because they were quitting the product. But we had to keep learning and testing and learning and testing. And along the ways, just to figure out what we'd done wrong. On the ways, we found problems with myths about our customers, myths about the product. Every one of those things we learned about, and we found problems with our process. And one thing I'll tell you, because I'm sure you're kind of interested, what had happened. One, this user interface, not as good as it seemed in advance. But more importantly, we found a problem with our process in that we found a bug in our A/B testing system. And in our A/B testing system, we found this issue where we deployed 2 different tests to the same cohort of users in New Zealand. One of those tests was the Spotify Now, and the other test turned off advertising in our free product. So essentially, we were giving our premium product to our customers for free. And we learned from that test, and that might give a 7% increase in retention. Our test had actually hurt the results of their test, but for us, it completely obliterated ours. So the good part from this was Spotify had this great culture about learning from failure. We learned a tremendous amount from that failure. And the company, rather than punishing us, actually rewarded us for how we learned from that failure. And the lessons from that failure led to features like Daily Mix and Discover Weekly and Release Radar, and features still coming out to this day that have actually increased Spotify's growth significantly. So these set of features, big failure. The things that we learned from this failure, massive success. I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So I think I can take your questions. I think we've got that set up. But I think they have to turn around the camera. Just checking. To do that, and the microphone and stuff. If normally I'd tell you to come and talk to me afterwards. I understand you can't do that. This is my Twitter handle. Feel free to tweet questions to me, and I'd be very happy to answer them. And sure, if you want, I can take questions.
Yeah, and if you stop sharing your screen, we'll see you a little bigger. We got a few questions up here. Top one, we loved Clippy. Why'd you take it away from us?
I did not take Clippy away from you. I just happened to work there. But if somebody loves Clippy, you are the only person I have ever met who says that.
I think maybe that was a rhetorical question.
Okay.
All right. So how would you punish not learning from a failure?
So it'd be very simply the conversation of somebody makes the same mistake twice, and the conversation is what happened. Why did we make that mistake? I think it's more important again. So when like people here at Avvo, I'm almost famous for this. At the end of every project, wow, that project was really great. Like this team did awesome. When's the retrospective? I really want to see what we learned from the retrospective. And then they'll also hear me say, yeah, this didn't work out the way we'd hoped. When's the retrospective? I really want to see the notes from that so that we can learn from it. So it's not so much about punishing that we're not learning, but more about creating the culture where learning is built in and expected. And so then when somebody doesn't learn, they've deliberately tried to not do that. And then that's a conversation you can have.
Okay, and we'll do just one more.
Okay.
How do you spot not learning from failure?
How do you spot not learning from failure? Well, that's pretty simply like you see folks making the same mistake over and over and over again. This test automation thing, like let's say you have a service and that server has an incident and you've run out of disk space, okay, which happens, right? And sure, okay, so in the retrospective, you say, oh, okay, well, we should add monitoring so around disk space, or at least developers we should make a check box so developers check disk space on their services every once in a while. Okay, and then 6 months later, oh, you have another failure. What happened in the failure? Oh, you ran out of disk space again. Okay, well, did we not pay attention the last time we had this discussion, right?
Yep.
What went wrong here that has gone wrong before, and why didn't we learn from that lesson?
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's give Kevin a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
And we're very sorry you couldn't join us here in Budapest. We do have a little gift for you, which we'll put in the post. That's your own caricature on a mug, so we'll get that to you.
Thank you very much.
And
I am so disappointed I'm not there.
Next time.
Okay,
right.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, and we'll set up for the next speaker.
All right, thank you.